Hello, I'm Deborah Malone, founder of The Internationalist and host of Internationalist Marketing TV. Today's guest is Jon Lee, advertising agency principal at Lerma with long experience in nonprofit marketing. Jon, welcome to the show. You have been doing some amazing work, and I just can't wait to get into a conversation about it. So, again, welcome, welcome, welcome.
Thank you, Deborah. Looking forward to it.
Good, good. As am I. Okay. Well, I mentioned your work, and you work with some of the nation's most recognized nonprofit organizations: Salvation Army, Compassion International, American Diabetes Association. From your vantage point, what has changed most in nonprofit marketing over the last few years? Is it the media landscape, donor psychology, cultural expectations, or is it something else?
I think it's probably the decision-making process. The decision-making process for making a gift has totally transformed. Um, there has been this historic kind of understood trigger or collection of triggers that people tend to have when it comes to making a gift, whether it's urgency, like a natural disaster, personal history with a lot of the health and disease organizations, a really good emotional problem solution storytelling plot. A lot of new organizations really effectively use those. And they have a basic set of criteria: efficiency, you know, how many cents of every dollar goes to program, effectiveness, scale, track record. And I think these days there's a completely new set of criteria. The triggers are still very much the same, but there's this new set of criteria that people use to choose who they're going to make a gift to. It has a lot more to do with values alignment and affiliation and social credibility and like personal identity. Like what does it say about the person that I am that I choose to give to this organization? It's a completely different way uh, to think about one's nonprofit. It's not just how am I able to be the hero in the story of good in the world, but what does it say about who I am, both to myself and to others? And
You
that's a very different way to think about it.
you make a fascinating point because that is almost a 180-degree switch in terms of how we traditionally used to think about giving and not only giving, but how nonprofits themselves market. You have said though that younger donors, and again, just to go from your last point, you've often said that younger donors aren't just supporting a mission. They're making a statement about themselves. Now, I'm sure that that's again values alignment and so on and so forth. But if that's the case, how should nonprofits rethink their storytelling to reflect identity and belonging and not just impact? Or is it a balance of both?
It has to be a balance of both. It has to be a balance of both. But it's not just younger donors. It started with younger donors, and I think it's we think about Gen Z and millennial donors as younger donors, but really you're talking about 40% of American adults. You're talking about the majority culture, and even if they're not the majority of income for these nonprofits, they are helping to build the expectations, and they're building the culture around how we give, not just how we give, but how we buy. I always tell nonprofit clients that, when you have a charity or a cause or a mission, you are selling a product. The product you're selling is a picture of the good that the donor is doing in the world. And the best pictures are the ones where the donor gets to be the hero. That's always been true. The difference now is that the donor is not only the hero, but they're also um, um, communicating an aspect of their identity, maybe even crafting an aspect of their identity. And that started as something that happened among younger audiences, but you're starting to see it in every aspect of not just nonprofit brands, but all brands. The big institutional organizations are having a hard time with even some of their traditional audiences. The value proposition of where a product is available and what the different scale and size and price. Those aren't the things that people are considering first anymore. Oftentimes, they're considering what does it say about who I am. Much more is that the case for nonprofit.
Yeah, and I'm so delighted that you talked about that very link between nonprofits and brand because I think marketing is marketing. And there, although obviously nonprofits probably have a much harder job to do, given that every penny has to count, as you started to say, and they probably have more regulation than some brands do. But it's fascinating to me how in this case you're talking about how a nonprofit sensibility also relates to all brands and how people sell. That is very interesting. You you also have subtly, in some ways, pointed to a concept of trust. Because some of the things that you're saying about what people believe in usually goes back to a matter of who you trust and what brands you are trusting. How does that factor into your marketing thinking, particularly now that we've learned from, my goodness, so many studies from Edelman to meaningful brands, that how much trust has eroded?
Yeah, it's especially in the nonprofit space where you would expect trust to be maybe higher than it would be for other for-profit brands. It's really not in a lot of places, especially in the United States. I think it's at 50-50 in the last Element Trust Barometer. And um, it's a table stakes issue, trust. And one of the challenges um, that big nonprofits often face is the double-edged sword of their institutional status. And among this new majority culture, there is a healthy skepticism of these institutions that have been part of our culture for generations. There's a expectation to prove it in a way that they haven't had to in many generations, many decades, where just because you're big doesn't necessarily mean you're trustworthy. In fact, in many cases, you have the burden of proof of trustworthiness because of your size, and that's new, where local and small and storytelling around issues that I care about in places that I care about, people that I can know, people that I can be a part of. That's very attractive. And uh, trying to tell the story from the perspective of a big, major, trusted, vaunted old institution is a challenge because there's a stalwart, uh, existing donor group that will continually give to that. But if you're going to prospect for new donors, you have to demonstrate to them that you are still relevant. You have to demonstrate that you have a capacity for understanding the lived experiences of people outside of your primary donor base. It's a real challenge that a lot of big institutions are facing, both nonprofit and for profit.
That's fascinating. I wonder if that means that people are now thinking more about community-based nonprofits, or you say smaller for sure, but perhaps more local, so that they almost feel the impact faster. And again, I don't, many nonprofits also who are big also have that local component. But I'm just curious because community is so much a part of both purposeful brand building and I guess now giving.
Well, and there's been an explosion of new nonprofits over the past 20 years, as many baby boomers have aged into a different um, maybe second act of their career or maybe a more altruistic moment in their lives. There's been just an explosion of nonprofits and foundations, and on top of that, there are all of these new financial instruments like donor advised funds that are helping to inform where those dollars go. The competition for those donor dollars is has never been higher. Now we're in the middle of the largest transfer of wealth in human history. And it just so happens it's also a moment where nonprofits have faced more competition than they've ever faced before. They face a more challenging environment for figuring out how to navigate storytelling about their mission in culture today than they've ever faced before. So while the opportunity is massive, the it seems the challenges have met them in size and scale.
Yeah, that's ironic, really, isn't it? That you do see that transfer of wealth and yet the skepticism. Let me just talk about ask you about two things that I think I like to just consider for a minute. The first is you've talked a lot about radical transparency, and I just thought while we were on trust and shifts like that, that maybe you would address what you mean by that. And the other area that I don't want to forget is let's let's also start looking at generations, because you've now mentioned so many when you think about it, whether it's majority culture and Gen Z and millennials and boomers, and I think the only one we've missed is X and Alpha. But let's then segue to that. But talk first about radical transparency and what that means.
Sure. Radical transparency is really about um, not having any daylight between the mission, the donor intent, and the story that you're telling as a brand. Whether your brand is a consumer product or a nonprofit, you're making a promise, and organizations that make and communicate and keep promises well have strong brands, and organizations that don't have weak brands. And there is so little room for nuance in storytelling. We don't have time to get so detailed in the way that we talk about how dollars are used. So it's really important that in an economy of words and ideas, we can be very deliberate and expressing exactly how the donors' intent to make the world a better place is being served and being delivered through the nonprofit. I always tell brands that in the nonprofit space that the goal is to help the donor feel confident that you will be a humble steward of their kindness and generosity to the world, and that they can trust you to do that over the long term. Oftentimes, that starts small. It doesn't start with a major ask, and that is and then demonstrating through relationship marketing just how well you deliver on that.
Well, you make it sound simple, but I know that it's tremendously complex. Let's talk, and I think that might be one of the best definitions that I've heard about the clarity within of responsibility that a brand, and particularly a nonprofit brand, has to have. Let's just talk about a little bit about, as I say, generations. I know that you are not that keen on, is it the idea of generations or demographics? But talk a little bit about what you mean by that.
Well, I think that demographics are blunt instruments. And I think given the democratization of data products that are available to us, we can get much better at knowing our audience than just those blunt instruments that we've used in generations past for media targeting. Um, I think the biggest divide in culture, and there's a lot of them. We have political divides and racial divides and religious divides and all sorts of different identity divides. I think the biggest divide is generational. And I think that the challenge that many nonprofits face is how to balance the needs and values of their existing donor base, which is oftentimes an older group, with finding, prospecting, and cultivating a new donor generation. It's very challenging because they're so vastly different in ways that generations haven't been different in the past. We've always had in human history, we've always had differences between generations, but I think because of technology and media, we are seeing a divide that is pretty unique in human history.
Yeah, and it could be that we have probably more generations now than we ever did in the past that are still alive, and people may perceive them as having certain values, whether that is true or not. If you look at the 50 plus generation, they certainly seem to be very different.
Yeah. Well, one of the things I always uh, try to point out is how the way that we consume information isn't just changing the way we think, it's changing the way our brains operate. Imagine having a news feed oriented social media experience before you fully formed your capacity for rational thought. That's what this younger generation is experiencing. Now imagine that you go from Walter Cronkite to X in your lifetime. Media. Those are the two disparate experiences of information and truth. On one side, it's such a rapid transformation over decades of life that trying to keep up with what to trust and what not to trust is incredibly difficult. On the other side, you've got a group of people who, um, because they have been exposed through this machine in their pocket to every challenge and every problem and every story in the world all the time. They feel responsible for all the problems in the world and powerless to solve any of them. It's a huge mental health challenge, and it's also a huge opportunity for nonprofits.
Provided that they have the money to be able to donate. That I guess is part of the challenge, isn't it? That the different generations usually have different amounts. Now, I know that you did say that one of the wonderful things is to start small, keep expectations going, and perhaps build a customer for life. So how do you kind of bridge these, shall we say, dual strategies? There might be more than dual, but in terms of younger and that overwhelming feeling of responsibility and the difficulties of not knowing what to do with it, and then perhaps a generation that's grown up with a lot of these charities or have a belief in charitable giving.
I would say long-term thinking. One of the biggest challenges, one of the biggest um, issues that I see in a lot of nonprofit marketing is short-term thinking. Um, you can go cultivate new donors and donor prospects with powerful storytelling and excellent targeting, and you can ask them for a gift of $150 or $250. Or you can do the same thing and ask for $25 a month. And in the fiscal year that you spent the dollars in the budget, your average gift is going to be lower and it's going to look like your return on investment was lower. But if you watch that donor over 2 or 3 years, you're going to see 3x the value for that donor. Now, that takes a very long-term, very courageous uh, um, client that is willing to have a long-term investment in a donor relationship. But we've seen it for the past probably 8 years now, where the recurring gift at just $25 a month is actually more valuable for almost every nonprofit that we work with than a single gift of $200 or $300.
I certainly believe that, but we're also in a bit of a subscription economy as well. So whether we're paying for our media or whether
Yeah.
we're paying, to save animals through ASPCA or whatever it is, that subscription has just become another part of life. Which no, I'm not saying it's not important. And I mean the challenge, not only for nonprofits but all brands in a world where they're balancing performance marketing and brand building all the time, particularly when their bosses want immediate results, or if you're a nonprofit, you need immediate revenues to keep functioning. It becomes difficult. Um, I mean, I have seen things. One of the UK marketing organizations has put out a news item that says 60% of one's effort should be brand building. And I'm sure that's very helpful, but I think that, there's ups and downs, particularly with nonprofits in terms of whether it's situations in the world or potential disasters or just economic need, or funding cuts or whatever the it might be. But how do you advise trying to take a longer term view to a client that puts so much energy into short term fundraising?
Well, you have to start with building trust yourself. I have the great privilege of having many decades now of working with nonprofits that with a track record of showing some success in long-term thinking. And so, um, my first order of business is to help them see the vision that I can see from the experience that I've had. Um, what I tell clients is listen more than you speak. When you listen to your audience, when you listen to what their needs are, when you listen to what their motivations are, when you start to watch their behavior with you over time, you'll realize that you don't have to choose one or the other. You're going to have some donors that are going to be reliable givers annually or semi-annually. You're going to have others that are testing the waters with you, and you're going to be able to find those segments for the first time, ever. The capacity for building individualized journeys has been democratized to the point where nonprofits can afford to do it. What it takes is a dedication, a commitment to that strategy, and it takes a willingness to have a learning agenda. I would never advise any organization that they should spend any specific percentage of money on one thing or the other until we've listened to the audience. The audience will tell us. And the other thing about listening, if you do a tracking study and you'd have your primary brand metrics, your awareness and perception, whatever it might be, favorability. Um, if you measure those a couple of times a year in and out of a media investment period, you can start to build some pretty strong, statistically significant correlations between brand metrics and finances. And then you can start to build some um, models around what different investment scenarios might accomplish for you. That's when you can really get a board excited about investing in marketing. I tell generally, depending on the client, depending on the situation, depending on their brand strength, there should be at least about somewhere between 10 and 30% of their budget should be focused on a learning agenda. Whether that's in a direct response fundraising learning agenda or a brand learning agenda, they should be looking at that as something to do. The biggest opportunity cost in most organizations is being late to innovation.
Mhm. I mean, that is pretty impressive. Now, do you then see more similarities among how nonprofits think? Or, you did call out that different categories or different specializations have different issues. Is it easier, for example, with healthcare organizations, for example, to take a longer term approach because they may be more used to the research that medical research that takes longer? I mean, I'm just curious because I doubt that it's a pat answer for every one of them, particularly if you spend most of your time listening.
I don't think there's a category that is more or less risk averse. I think there are individuals. I think it comes down to relationship. It comes down to trust. It comes down to having great leadership. Um, so often it has to do with the relationship among the C-suite of an organization. How well is the chief development and chief marketing and chief executive and chief finance people um, committing to each other and to each other's success? how involved is the board, and how many folks in that capacity have a vision for cultivating donors, and that really has more to do with it than the category or industry. It has to do with the people.
Yeah, and I think what we're seeing is we're also seeing a lot of people who were working for-profit brands now migrate to the nonprofit sector in kind of a post-COVID world because they truly do want to take the skills they have and do good. So that might be a way of doing more. Speaking of for-profit brands, are you seeing more collaborations now between nonprofits and brands? I mean, I would think that would be a wonderful way to both amplify, the nonprofit's mission, while at the same time helping a brand, be identified with some core causes that are truly at the heart of what that brand is about. I mean, obviously they have to be well thought out, but are you seeing, I mean,
Never before have brands had a more defined, specific strategy for partnering with nonprofits, for having a cause orientation. And that's a good thing and a bad thing for nonprofits that want to make an impact with in that space. Cultivating those relationships is a long-term prospect. It's almost like major giving. It's like it takes a long time to cultivate the trust and relationships you need to do those well. But there's also, most organizations now have very specific pillars. They have teams that are devoted to that part of the organization and their expectations of how the company is going to impact the world positively. And it's really about demonstrating that you're the best candidate for them to accomplish that mission, or at least one of them, to get on the roster of people that they're partnering with in that way. Um, Brands have an obligation to their employees and their customers to give them an opportunity to do something to impact the world in a positive way that never existed before. And it's been around long enough now to where it's pretty mature. There are whole um, organizations and entities that help build those partnerships. We have a practice here at Lerma that actually helps build nonprofit for-profit partnerships, based on having those relationships with both nonprofit teams and then also those teams within big corporations. Um, One of the biggest mistakes I see that nonprofits make is they don't adequately staff for those partnerships. They use existing development or fundraising teams instead of going and getting people who are expressly expert in that, because it's a full-time job and it's a career in and of itself.
also hope that it's a new source of revenue for many nonprofits as well.
For sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, the
Yeah.
ROI is there. But again, it takes long-term thinking because it's
And
not immediate.
And, and once it happens, it can take a long time. And we just did something about Mattel and 80 years of giving and relationships that they've had with nonprofits in their Play It Forward movement. And then Pepsi has had some that are 30 plus years, a lot of them in the food area, and or children and food. And those are remarkable, but they are big companies that do, lend themselves to that. And that it's very
Yes.
interesting to see that transformation and that it can be a win-win, but I do understand what you mean by some of the challenges. Um, well, uh, stepping back, what do you think that nonprofit leaders sometimes underestimate about the nature of giving now? We opened with this, and you did talk a little bit about decision making, but I think that it's probably such a time of such tremendous transition that it's got to be so difficult for them.
It is, and navigating the navigating the waters of culture today is a challenge for every brand, especially nonprofit brands, because it's such a values-oriented category. The I think the most common advice that I give when people are asking, the "what would you do if you were me" question, when they're asking, how do I put myself in a position to not fumble or trip over these, issues of the day. I think there are two things that nonprofits have to do. Number one, don't be distracted. The Your donor base, sometimes, the loud minorities in social media, the and many other constituents and cohorts will make it feel like you need to have an authoritative point of view on every issue of the day. And you've got to stay true to your mission. The things that you need to care about, your audience will tell you. Social listening will not tell you. You've got to listen to your donors. Listen more than you speak. And if they're not concerned about it, then you need to stay focused on mission. If it's not impacting your mission, stay focused on mission. And the second thing I would say is you need to have the lived experience of the people that you hope to reach represented in your decision-making process. That's very difficult because it means bringing people into leadership, not necessarily just of all different ages, but of the different lived experiences in America. One of my favorite things about Lerma is that we look like America. If you look at the demographic makeup of the agency, it's very similar to the demographic makeup of the United States, and that is, I think, a real value for us because we have people in the room that, whatever audience we're trying to reach, look like that audience, have experienced what that audience has experienced. How can you do that with your board? How can you do that with your advisory councils? How can you do that with your strategic leadership? That's the challenge for nonprofits.
And I would say in some cases it might be the challenge increasingly for for-profits as we probably go through a more polarized world. You have just been an amazing source of inspiration, and I really hope that our conversations continue because I'd love to spend time getting your advice on which nonprofits, for example, have done rebrands that have been successful and some who, we might learn from some of the difficulties. But for now, this has been such a wonderful and enlightening way to talk to people. I really appreciate you taking the time to do this. Thank you.
Oh, this has been fun, Deborah. Thanks for asking me.
The Internationalist focuses on the continual reinvention of marketing by highlighting inspirational marketers around the world and their ideas as they move the industry forward. Internationalist Marketing TV shares these perspectives through interviews and personal stories. Thanks so much for watching. If you find this kind of content helpful, please click like or subscribe. Again, thanks so much.